It was a cold evening in the heart of the city. The streets were busy with people rushing home, their faces buried in scarves, their hands tucked deep into coat pockets. Among the sea of pedestrians was a man who didn't have a home to go to. His clothes were worn, his shoes barely holding together, and his eyes carried the weight of countless sleepless nights. He sat outside a small, cozy restaurant, watching the warm glow of the lights inside, the laughter of customers, the clinking of silverware against plates. The aroma of freshly baked bread and sizzling food filled the air, making his stomach tighten with hunger. Inside the restaurant, the chef, a man named Daniel, was wrapping up another long shift. He had worked in kitchens his whole life, pouring his heart into every dish he made. Cooking wasn't just a job for him, it was his passion. He believed food had the power to bring people together, to offer comfort, to heal. And that belief was exactly what led him to notice the man outside his restaurant that night. Daniel had seen him before, lingering around the neighborhood, never asking for anything, but always looking hungry. He could have ignored him, like so many others did, but something about this man's eyes, tired yet full of quiet dignity, made Daniel pause. Without a second thought, he packed up a warm meal, stepped outside, and handed it to the man. "Here," he said with a kind smile. "No charge, just eat." The man looked up, startled. It had been a long time since someone had offered him kindness, without expecting anything in return. For a moment, he hesitated, as if trying to decide whether this was real, or just another fleeting act of pity. But Daniel's warm eyes reassured him, and with a small grateful nod, he accepted the food. He didn't say much, just a quiet, "Thank you." But the way he held the meal, as if it was the most precious thing in the world, spoke volumes. Days passed, and the man returned, not to beg, not to ask for more, but just to sit outside, watching the world go by. And every evening, without fail, Daniel would step out and hand him another warm meal. It became an unspoken routine, a silent understanding between them. Daniel never asked the man about his past, never questioned why he was homeless. He just gave, and in return, the man always accepted with quiet gratitude. But then one day, everything changed. The man stopped coming. Daniel noticed immediately. The spot outside the restaurant felt strangely empty without him. At first, he thought maybe the man had found shelter somewhere, or maybe he had simply moved on, but something in his gut told him there was more to it. He found himself looking out the window more often, scanning the streets, hoping to see the familiar figure again. And then, just when Daniel had almost given up hope, the man returned. But this time, he wasn't alone, and he wasn't empty-handed. What happened next would leave Daniel completely speechless, because the man who had once needed a helping hand was about to change Daniel's life in a way he never saw coming. One evening, just as Daniel was about to close up the restaurant, he heard a voice at the door. It was low but steady. "Hey, chef." Daniel turned, and there he was, the homeless man he had been quietly helping for weeks. But this time, he wasn't alone. Beside him stood another man, dressed in clean but simple clothes, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. The homeless man looked different too. He stood a little taller, his shoulders a little straighter. There was something in his eyes, a quiet determination that Daniel hadn't seen before. "I was looking for you," Daniel said, relieved to see him again. "Thought maybe you left town." The man gave a small smile, the kind that held more than just politeness. It was gratitude, maybe even something deeper. "Had some things to take care of," he said. He glanced at the other man beside him, who remained quiet but observant. "This is Michael, a friend." Daniel nodded at Michael, though curiosity stirred in the back of his mind. "Come in," he said. pushing open the door. "I'll get you something to eat." But the man didn't step inside. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. His hands were rough and weathered, but they didn't shake as he held it out to Daniel. "Not tonight," he said. "This time I came to give you something." Daniel hesitated. In all their silent exchanges, in all the times he had handed this man food without asking for anything in return, he had never expected the man to bring something back. He took the envelope and slowly opened it. What he saw inside made him blink, his breath catching for just a moment. There was money inside. Not just a few bills, hundreds of dollars, neatly tucked into the envelope. Daniel looked up, confused. "What is this?" The man shifted on his feet. "It's for you," he said simply. Daniel shook his head. "I can't take this. I gave you those meals because I wanted to. You don't owe me anything." The man exhaled, glancing at Michael, who gave him a small nod. Then he met Daniel's gaze. "You don't know my story," he said. "You never asked, and I appreciated that. But maybe it's time you know why this matters." For the first time since they had met, the man sat down at one of the tables. Daniel followed, still holding the envelope, but no closer to understanding what was happening. "I wasn't always like this," the man began. "I had a life, a business, a family. I built something from nothing. I worked hard, just like you." He let out a breath. And then one day, it was all gone. Bad decisions. Trusting the wrong people. I lost everything. And before I knew it, I was on the streets. Daniel listened, the weight of the man's words settling in. He had always known there was a story behind those tired eyes, but he had never imagined this. "I had nothing left," the man continued, "not even hope. And then I met you." He looked straight at Daniel. "You didn't know me. You didn't know if I was worth helping, but you did it anyway. No judgment, no questions, just kindness. That changed something for me." Michael, who had remained quiet until now, finally spoke. "He's been working hard to turn things around," he said, "and he wanted to make sure the first thing he did was repay the kindness that gave him the push he needed." Daniel glanced between them, still struggling to process everything. "I didn't do anything special," he said. The man shook his head. "You did more than you think." He gestured toward the envelope. "Take it. It's not just money. It's proof that kindness isn't wasted, that what you did mattered." Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. He had spent years in the restaurant business, feeding strangers every day. But this was different. This was a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness could change a person's life in ways he never expected. Still, he hesitated. "Are you sure you don't need this more than I do?" The man smiled. "I have a second chance now, and I owe a part of that to you." Daniel looked at the envelope one last time before finally nodding. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about something bigger. The quiet, unspoken way people could lift each other up, even in the most unexpected ways. Outside, the city moved on as usual. But inside that small restaurant, something had changed. Not just for Daniel, not just for the man he had helped, but for anyone who had ever wondered if one good deed could really make a difference. Because sometimes kindness comes full circle, and when it does, it's more powerful than anyone could ever imagine. Daniel sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything settling in. He had spent his whole life in kitchens, believing food was the best way to bring people together. But this was different. This was proof that even the smallest gestures had the power to change lives. He looked at the man. No, not just a man anymore, but someone with a name, a past, and now a future. "You never told me your name," Daniel said, realizing it was something he should have asked long ago. The man smiled. a warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "It's James." Daniel nodded, letting the name settle. It felt right, like closing a gap that had been there all along. He looked at the envelope again, then back at James. "I appreciate this," he said, "but you didn't have to do it. I did," James said. "Not just for you, but for me. Because of you, I remembered what it felt like to have hope again." Daniel wasn't the type to get emotional, but this moment was different. He had spent years working hard, running his restaurant, giving to people without expecting anything in return. And yet, here was a man who had nothing, offering him something so valuable. Not just money, but a reminder of why kindness mattered. Michael, who had been watching quietly, finally spoke again. "James has been working with me," he said. "I run a small business, and he's been helping out. He's got a place to stay now. He's rebuilding." Daniel felt a deep sense of pride. Even though he had played only a small part in James's journey. "That's incredible," he said. "I'm really happy for you." James nodded. "And I want to do more. I want to help others, the way you helped me." Daniel thought for a moment. Then an idea formed. "You know," he said, leaning forward, "if you're serious about that, I could use an extra pair of hands in the kitchen. Nothing too fancy at first. Just some prep work. But it's a start." James's eyes widened. "You mean it?" Daniel grinned. "Yeah, I mean it." For the first time since they met, James looked like a man who had finally found his footing. The streets had taken so much from him, but now he had a chance to build something again. He reached out his hand, and Daniel shook it, sealing the start of something new. Days passed, then weeks. James showed up every morning, eager to learn. He wasn't just grateful. He was determined. He worked hard, proving to Daniel and everyone else that he was ready to leave his past behind. Customers started noticing him, asking about the new guy in the kitchen. And Daniel, though never one for long explanations, would simply say, "That's James. He's part of the family now." One evening, as they were closing up, James stood by the door, looking out at the same streets where he had once slept. "It's funny," he said, "how one small act can change everything." Daniel nodded, watching the city lights flicker. "Yeah," he said, "it is." And just like that, the story came full circle. A meal given with kindness, a man who found hope again, and a reminder that in a world that often moves too fast, sometimes the smallest moments mattered the most.